Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, Chapter 8, Frustration. Lyra had to adjust to her new sense of her own story, and that couldn't be done in a day. To see Lord Asriel as her father was one thing, but to accept Mrs. Coulter as her mother was nowhere near so easy. A couple of months ago she would have rejoiced, of course, and she knew that too, and felt confused. But being Lyra, she didn't fret about it for too long, for there was the fen town to explore, and many Egyptian children to amuse. Before the 3 days were up, she was an expert with a punt, in her eyes at least, and she'd gathered a gang of urchins about her with tales of her mighty father, so unjustly made captive. And then one evening the Turkish ambassador was a guest at Jordan for dinner, and he was under orders from the Sultan himself to kill my father, right? And he had a ring on his finger with a hollow stone full of poison. And when the wine came round, he made as if to reach across my father's glass, and he sprinkled the poison in. It was done so quick that no one else saw him, but... "What sort of poison?" demanded a thin-faced girl. "Poison out of a special Turkish serpent Lyra invented. What they catch by playing a pipe to lure out, and then they throw it a sponge soaked in honey, and the serpent bites it and can't get his fangs free, and they catch it and milk the venom out of it. Anyway, my father's seen what the Turk done, and he says, 'Gentlemen, I want to propose a toast of friendship between Jordan College and the College of Izmir,'" which was the college the Turkish ambassador belonged to. "And to show our willingness to be friends," he says, "we'll swap glasses and drink each other's wine." And the ambassador was in a fix then, because he couldn't refuse to drink without giving deadly insult, and he couldn't drink it because he knew it was poison. He went pale and he fainted right away at the table. And when he came round, they were all still sitting there, waiting and looking at him. And then he had to either drink the poison or own up. So what did he do? He drunk it. It took him 5 whole minutes to die, and he was in torment all the time. Did you see it happen? No, because girls ain't allowed at the high table, but I seen his body afterwards when they laid him out. His skin was all withered like an old apple, and his eyes were starting from his head. In fact, they had to push him back in the sockets. And so on. Meanwhile, around the edges of the fen country, the police were knocking at doors, searching attics and outhouses, inspecting papers and interrogating everyone who claimed to have seen a blonde little girl. And in Oxford the search was even fiercer. Jordan College was scoured from the dustiest box room to the darkest cellar, and so were Gabriel and St Michael's, till the heads of all the colleges issued a joint protest asserting their ancient rights. The only notion Lyra had of the search for her was the incessant drone of the gas engines of airships criss-crossing the skies. They weren't visible because the clouds were low, and by statute airships had to keep a certain height above fen country. But who knew what cunning spy devices they might carry? Best to keep under cover when she heard them, or wear the oilskin sou'wester over her bright, distinctive hair. And she questioned Mark Oster about every deal of the story about her birth. She wove the details into a mental tapestry even clearer and sharper than the story she made up, and lived over and over again the flight from the cottage, the concealment in the closet, the harsh-voiced challenge, the clash of swords. "Swords? Great God, girl, you dreaming?" Mark Oster said. "Mr. Coulter had a gun, and Lord Asriel knocked it out his hand and struck him down with one blow. Then there was 2 shots. I wonder you don't remember. You ought to, little as you were. The first shot was Edward Coulter, who reached his gun and fired, and the second was Lord Asriel, who tore it out of his grasp a second time and turned it on him, shot it right between the eyes and dashed his brains out. Then he says, cool as paint, 'Come out, Mrs. Coster, and bring the baby, because you were setting up such a howl, you and that demon both,' and he took you up and dandled you and sat you on his shoulders, walking up and down in high good humour with the dead man at his feet, and called for wine and bade me swab the floor." By the end of the 4th repetition of the story, Lyra was perfectly convinced she did remember it, and even volunteered details of the colour of Mr. Coulter's coat and the cloaks and furs hanging in the closet. Mark Oster laughed. And whenever she was alone, Lyra took out the alethiometer and pored over it like a lover with a picture of the beloved. So each image had several meanings, did it? Why shouldn't she work them out? Wasn't she Lord Asriel's daughter? Remembering what Father Coram had said, she tried to focus her mind on 3 symbols taken at random and clicked the hands round to point at them. She found that if she held the alethiometer just so in her palms and gazed at it in a particular lazy way as she thought of it, the long needle would begin to move more purposefully. Instead of its wayward divagations around the dial, it swung smoothly from one picture to another. Sometimes it would pause at 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 5 or more, and although she understood nothing of it, She gained a deep, calm enjoyment from it, unlike anything she'd known. Pantalaimon would crouch over the dial, sometimes as a cat, sometimes as a mouse, swinging his head round after the needle, and once or twice the two of them shared a glimpse of meaning that felt as if a shaft of sunlight had struck through clouds to light up a majestic line of great hills in the distance. Something far beyond and never suspected. And Lyra thrilled at those times with the same deep thrill she'd felt all her life on hearing the word north. So the 3 days passed with much coming and going between the multitude of boats and the Tsar. And then came the evening of the second roping. The hall was more crowded than before, if that was possible. Lyra and the costers got there in time to sit at the front, and as soon as the flickering lights showed that the place was crammed, John Farr and Father Coram came out on the platform and sat behind the table. John Farr didn't have to make a sign for silence. He just put his great hands flat on the table and looked at the people below, and the hubbub died. "Well," he said, "you've done what I asked, and better than I hoped. I'm a-going to call on the heads of the 6 families now to come up here and give over their gold and recount their promises. Nicholas Rokeby, you come first." A stout, black-bearded man climbed onto the platform and laid a heavy leather bag on the table. "That's our gold," he said, "and we offer 38 men." "Thank you, Nicholas," said John Farr. Father Coram was making a note. The first man stood at the back of the platform as John Farr called for the next, and each came up, laid a bag on the table, and announced the number of men he could muster. The Costers were part of the Stefanski family, and naturally Tony had been one of the first to volunteer. Lyra noticed his hawk demon shifting from foot to foot and spreading her wings as the Stefanski money and the promise of 23 men were laid before John Farr. When the 6 family heads had all come up, Father Coram showed his piece of paper to John Farr, who stood up to address the audience again. "Friends, that's a muster of 170 men. I thank you proudly. As for the gold, I make no doubt from the weight of it that you've all dug deep in your coffers, and my warm thanks go out for that as well. What we're going to do next is this. We're going to charter a ship and sail north and find them kids and set them free. From what we know, there must be some fighting to do. It won't be the first time, nor it won't be the last, but we never had to fight yet with people who kidnap children, and we shall have to be uncommon cunning. But we ain't going to come back without our kids. Yes, Dirk Vries?" A man stood up and said, "Lord Farr, do you know why they captured them kids?" "We heard it's a theological matter. They're making an experiment, but what nature it is, we don't know. To tell you all the truth, we don't even know whether any harm is a-coming to them. But whatever it is, good or bad, they got no right to reach out by night and pluck little children out the hearts of their families. Yes, Raymond von Garrett?" The man who'd spoken at the first meeting stood up and said, "That child, Lord Farr, the one you spoke of as being sought, the one as is sitting in the front row now. I heard as all the folk living around the edge of the fens is having their houses turned upside down on her account. I heard there's a move in Parliament this very day to rescind our ancient privileges on account of this child. Yes, friends," he said over the babble of shocked whispers, "they're going to pass a law doing away with our right to free movement in and out the fens. Now, Lord Farr, what we want to know is this. Who is this child on account of which we might come to such a pass? She ain't Egyptian child, not as I heard. How comes is it that a landloper child can put us all in danger?" Lyra looked up at John Farr's massive frame. Her heart was thumping so much she could hardly hear the first words of his reply. "Now spell it out, Raymond, don't be shy," he said. "You want us to give this child up to them she's a-fleeing from, is that right?" The man stood obstinately frowning, but said nothing. "Well, perhaps you would and perhaps you wouldn't," John Farr continued. "But if any man or woman needs a reason for doing good, ponder on this. That little girl is the daughter of Lord Asriel, no less. For them as has forgotten, it were Lord Asriel who interceded with the Turk for the life of Sam Brockman. It were Lord Asriel who allowed Egyptian boats free passage on the canals through his property. It were Lord Asriel who defeated the Watercourse Bill in Parliament to our great and lasting benefit. And it were Lord Asriel who fought day and night in the floods of '53 and plunged headlong in the water twice to pull out young Rood and Nellie Koopman. You've forgotten that? Shame. Shame on you. Shame. And now that same Lord Asriel is held in the farthest, coldest, darkest regions of the wild, captive in the fortress of Svalbard. Do I need to tell you the kind of creatures are guarding him there? And this is his little daughter in our care, and Raymond Van Gerrit would hand her over to the authorities for a bit of peace and quiet. Is that right, Raymond? Stand up and answer, man. But Raymond Van Gerrit had sunk to his seat, and nothing could make him stand. A low hiss of disapproval sounded through the great hall, and Lyra felt the shame he must be feeling, as well as a deep glow of pride in her brave father. John Farr turned away and looked at the other men on the platform. Nicholas Rokeby, I am putting you in charge of finding a vessel and commanding her once we sail. Adam Stefanski, I want you to take charge of the arms and munitions and command the fighting. Roger Van Poppel, you to look to all other stores, from food to cold weather clothing. Simon Hartman, you be treasurer and account to us all for a proper apportionment of our gold. Benjamin de Ruyter, I want you to take charge of spying. There's a great deal we ought to find out, and I'm giving you the charge of that. And your report to Father Coram. Michael Canzona, you're going to be responsible for coordinating the first 4 leaders' work, and you'll report to me. And if I die, you're my second in command, and you'll take over. Now I've made my dispositions according to custom, and if any man or woman seeks to disagree, they may do so freely. After a moment, a woman stood up. Lord Farr, ain't you taken any women on this expedition to look after them kids once you found them? No, Nell, we should have little space as it is. Any kids we free will be better off in our care than where they've been. But supposing you find out that you can't rescue them without some women in disguise as guards or nurses or whatever? Well, I hadn't thought of that, John Farr admitted. We'll consider that most carefully when we retire into the parley room. You have my promise. She sat down and a man stood up. Lord Farr, I heard you say that Lord Asriel is in captivity. Is it part of your plan to rescue him? Because if it is, and if he's in the power of them bears, as I think you said, that's going to need more than 170 men. And good friend as Lord Asriel is to us, I don't know as there's any call on us to go as far as that. Adrian Brax, you're not wrong. What I had in my mind to do was keep our eyes and ears open and see what knowledge we can glean while we're in the north. It may be that we can do something to help him, and it may not. But you can trust me not to use what you've provided, man and gold, for any purpose outside the stated one of finding our children and bringing them home. Another woman stood up. Lord Farr, so we don't know what them gobblers might have been doing to our children. We all heard rumours and stories of fearful things. We hear about children with no heads, or about children cut in half and sewn together, or about things too awful to mention. I'm truly sorry to distress anyone, but we all heard this kind of thing, and I want to get it out in the open. Now, in case you find anything of that awful kind, Lord Farr, I hope you're going to take powerful revenge. I hope you ain't going to let thoughts of mercy and gentleness hold your hand back from striking and striking hard and delivering a mighty blow to the heart of that infernal wickedness. And I'm sure I speak for any mother who has lost a child to the gobblers. There was a loud murmur of agreement as she sat down. Heads were nodding all over the Tsar. John Farr waited for silence and said, Nothing will hold my hand, Margaret, save only judgment. If I stay my hand in the north, it will only be to strike the harder in the south. To strike a day too soon is as bad as striking 100 miles off. To be sure, there's a warm passion behind what you say. But if you give in to that passion, friends, you are doing what I always warned you again. You are placing the satisfaction of your own feelings above the work you have to do. Our work here is first rescue, then punishment. It ain't gratification for upset feelings. Our feelings don't matter. If we rescue the kids but we can't punish the gobblers, we've done the main task. But if we aim to punish the gobblers first, and by doing so lose the chance of rescuing the kids, we failed. But be assured of this, Margaret. When the time comes to punish, we shall strike such a blow as will make their hearts faint and fearful. We shall strike the strength out of them. We shall leave them ruined and waste, broken and shattered, torn in 1,000 pieces and scattered to the four winds. My own hammer is thirsty for blood, friends. She ain't tasted blood since I slew the Tartar champion on the steppes of Kazakhstan. She's been a-hanging in my boat and dreaming, but she can smell blood in the wind from the north. She spoke to me last night and told me of her thirst, and I said, soon, gal, soon. Margaret, you can worry about 100 things, but don't you worry that John Farr's heart is too soft to strike a blow when the time comes. And the time will come under judgment, not under passion. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Speak, if you will. But no one did, and presently John Farr reached for the closing bell and rang it hard and loud, swinging it high and shaking the peels out of it so that they filled the hall and rang the rafters. John Farr and the other men left the platform for the parley room. Lyra was a little disappointed. Didn't they want her there too? But Tony laughed. They got plans to make, he said. You done your part, Lyra. Now it's for John Farr and the council. But I ain't done nothing yet, Lyra protested as she followed the others reluctantly out of the hall and down the cobbled road towards the jetty. All I'd done was run away from Mrs. Coulter. That's just a beginning. I want to go north. Tell you what, said Tony. I'll bring you back a walrus tooth, that's what I'll do. Lyra scowled. For his part, Pantalaimon occupied himself by making monkey faces at Tony's demon, who closed her tawny eyes in disdain. Lyra drifted to the jetty and hung about with her new companions, dangling lanterns on strings over the black water to attract the goggle-eyed fishes who swam slowly up to be lunged at with sharp sticks and missed. But her mind was on John Farr in the parley room, and before long she slipped away up the cobbles again to the Zal. There was a light in the parley room window. It was too high to look through, but she could hear a low rumble of voices inside. So she walked up to the door and knocked on it firmly 5 times. The voices stopped, a chair scraped across the floor, and the door opened, spilling warm naphtha light out on the damp step. Yes, said the man who'd opened it. Beyond him, Lyra could see the other men round the table, with bags of gold stacked neatly, and papers and pens, and glasses, and a crock of Geneva. I want to come north, Lyra said so they could all hear it. I want to come and help rescue the kids. That's what I set out to do when I ran away from Mrs. Coulter. And before that even, I meant to rescue my friend Roger, the kitchen boy from Jordan, who was took. I want to come and help. I can do navigation and I can take amber magnetic readings of the aurora. And I know what parts of a bear you can eat and all kinds of useful things. You'd be sorry if you got up there and then found you needed me and found you'd left me behind. And like that woman said, you might need women to play a part. Well, you might need kids too. You don't know. So you ought to take me, Lord Farr. Excuse me for interrupting your talk. She was inside the room now, and all the men and their demons were watching her, some with amusement and some with irritation. But she had eyes only for John Farr. Pantalaimon sat up in her arms, his wildcat eyes blazing green. John Farr said, Lyra, there ain't no question of taking you into danger, so don't delude yourself, child. Stay here and help Ma Costa and keep safe. That's what you've got to do. But I'm learning how to read the alethiometer too. It's coming clearer every day. You're bound to need that. Bound to. He shook his head. No, he said. I know your heart was set on going north, but it's my belief not even Mrs. Coulter was going to take you. If you want to see north, you'll have to wait till all this trouble's over. Now off you go. Pantalaimon hissed quietly, but John Farr's demon took off from the back of his chair and flew at them with black wings. Not threateningly, but like a reminder of good manners. And Lyra turned on her heel as the crow glided over her head and wheeled back to John Farr. The door shut behind her with a decisive click. We will go, she said to Pantalaimon. Let them try to stop us. We will. So some suggested activities for this chapter. These take the same format. So if I don't do a recording with suggested activities, all you really need to do is choose a particularly descriptive or well-written phrase or section of the text and ask a couple of questions to do with it, talking about the words and the effect of them. And then maybe think of another activity linked to that chapter. So for this chapter, I've chosen the sentence, the two of them shared a glimpse of meaning that felt as if a shaft of sunlight had struck through the clouds to light up a majestic line of great hills in the distance, something far beyond and never suspected. There's a bit of a typo there, there's only supposed to be one and. And the questions are, what is the significance of the dash in this sentence? What effect does that create? So to think about that and discuss that or write it down. And then where is the simile in this sentence and what does it tell us about the character's emotions? And then lastly, just a more creative activity, design your own alethiometer. You could actually build it in a model, sculpt it, just draw it, get images, put them together as a collage. And what would you ask it? What would it answer? Just a bit of a creative, imaginative activity there. So I hope that's helpful.